Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1132 just came out, and this was one of the most visually beautiful One Piece chapters of all time. Everything from the travel up the gigantic Rainbow Bridge to the reveal of Elbaf's main kingdom itself just screamed absolute wonderland fantasy. It feels like this is the most dreamlike island that we've been to since Skypiea, which seems very interesting and deliberate because there are actually a ton of Skypiea arc parallels that are already taking shape with this arc, and next week's video is going to be talking about one point in particular that I think a lot of readers may not have picked up on that suggests that this arc is going to be a lot closer in storyline to Skypiea than we may have realized initially. But again, this chapter was a very nice reminder that when Oda decides to go really hard on art, even though I think panel to panel One Piece isn't always the best, his major spreads and dedicated visual displays are always fantastic. Again, the Kingdom of Elbaf he just knocked out of the park. And my personal favorite little scene in this chapter was once the Straw Hats were traveling up the Rainbow Bridge, we saw Hajrudin also just join in on his own ship traveling up the Rainbow Bridge, which just makes the Rainbow Bridge feel like this whimsical concept that doesn't really make sense in reality, but seeing characters just freely accept it for what it is and join in on it just adds to the sense of magic all around Elbaf. And I did think that it's an interesting little callback that in this same chapter where the magic and realism of the Rainbow Bridge was talked about and questioned and just accepted to be the case, we also brought up the concept of jumping on clouds and the island clouds, which was the whole discussion way back when the Skypiea arc was going on, which was like, is it even possible to actually walk and sail on clouds? It was like, no, that's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense according to the laws of physics. But right then we saw you can actually travel on clouds. The White Sea does exist, just as in this chapter we're being shown that of course you can travel on a rainbow. Why wouldn't you be able to travel on a rainbow? Everything that man can imagine is a possibility in reality. I also like that the previous arc right before this was fitting the Egghead Island, which stressed concepts such as like real or not real, that doesn't matter. If I can imagine it, I can kind of make that real. And we saw that through Vegapunk's approach to science right from the beginning of the arc, and it naturally connected to the concept of dreams and Nika as we saw over the course of the rest of the arc. But first, if you're excited for Elbaf, you can get the first Elbaf travel poster ever made for your walls today. This beautiful work of art comes in both day and night versions and is made with archival ink printed on matte paper hand cut by the artist himself. And that's not all. This month we are also releasing the Skypiea and Zou travel posters so that you can continue building your collection of all the islands of One Piece. You can even get all three of these beautiful posters together along with the exclusive Chandra poster for a major discount bundle, which is 50% off all 4 posters. You can also still get the deluxe package if you want to appear on my streams, and in that case you'll get all 5 posters as well. So start building your collection today with Elbaf, Skypiea, Zou, and Chandra. Just hit the link in the description below. And speaking of the magic of Elbaf, we have 2 notable winners from this week's chapter predictions contest. Manifest Joe correctly guessed that Elbaf will seem to have magic like Dressrosa had toys, which is certainly the case with the Rainbow Bridge. And JWP correctly guessed that all of the Straw Hats will meet up together, including Robin's group. And I'm sure a lot of readers are happy to see that the whole Straw Hat crew is back together again, and the little time period at the beginning of the arc where everyone was split up is now over. And while I will say that I'm happy to see everything back and simplified and all connected into, one moving cast of characters with one continuous plot thread, I am a little bit disappointed that Oda seemed to have split up the Straw Hats towards the beginning of the arc for no real reason. If you really go back and look at everything that happened, it's kind of just like, okay, Luffy talking to Loki was the only real moment where Straw Hats needed to be split up. However, Oda felt like he had to simplify things towards the beginning and just have the East Blue 5 kind of go through that whole Legoland adventure first while the rest of the Straw Hats were on standby before connecting them back together. Now, I am a little disappointed by that because I feel as though it's reflective of something that most readers at this point do feel to be true, but it seems that Oda is also aware at this point that is the case, which is that the Straw Hat crew is just too big. So having this cast of like 10 to 12 characters at this point all moving around together, all trying to get their dialogue in, their little quirks in, their little character moments, character dynamics in, it's just too much to have a nice little adventure. So yeah, if I think back on it, in that Legoland adventure, if we had all 12 Straw Hats, it would have just been more cluttered and more messy and more oversaturated. So we're at a point in the story where sometimes it seems like Oda just has to separate out some of the Straw Hats, not even for plot purposes, but just have a group separate and let the story play out through them and leave the rest on the side just so that you can tell a little adventure in and of itself that's not too cluttered. I think this is one of the first times that I've really seen that, because normally when Oda's splitting up the Straw Hats, it's usually at least with some sort of plot purpose in mind. Like, it's like, okay, well, this group's plot purpose is to do this, and this group's plot purpose is to do that, and everybody's getting something to do. So there's at least some narrative purpose to separating out the Straw Hats and having them do different things, but this was one of the first times it just feels like Oda was just like, yeah, I want to tell this Legoland adventure, but it would literally just be too crowded with the main cast of characters that I've created, so I want to simplify it further to just an even smaller cast of characters, just so I can tell this story and let it breathe. Which to me is just indicative of, like, maybe we have too many characters at this point. So I do hope that with the main plot of Elbaf kicking off at this point, that Oda is going into it with several storylines or character arcs, or at least character ideas planned out for all of the Straw Hats, or at least the majority of the Straw Hats. Maybe all of the Straw Hats is too much to ask for at this point, but please just don't let it be like Egghead again, and please just let there be something for the majority of the crew, because at the end of the day, the Straw Hats are the heart and soul of One Piece. So we love all the outside characters, we love side characters, we love meeting new island characters, but this is really what ties the story together. So if we're at a point where there's too many characters, well then, as the author, I just feel like he needs to put in more time into figuring out what to do with each of these characters to keep the heart of the story intact. Now, beyond this, there was one interesting observation I had this chapter, which is just a trend that's been taking place post-time skip. It's not a positive or negative trend, it's just a trend that seems to have developed, which is that Oda seems to be really enjoying writing Luffy's storylines with him being some sort of a mentor figure to a child figure in a lot of these arcs. That wasn't really common pre-time skip at all. But if you just think back through the post-time skip, particularly the New World, what we've been seeing is first like Luffy and Momonosuke. That was an important dynamic for a huge chunk of the story, with Luffy really mentoring Momonosuke. But then Luffy was this big brother figure to Tama also for a lot of Wano, and then we leave Wano, and then we're in Egghead, and then it's Luffy and Bonnie, with Luffy being this mentor figure or being a role model figure for Bonnie, and even teaching her how to be like Nika. And then moving away from that, now we're in Elbaf, and now there's this kid Colin. And Colin, out of all of these kids, is the most remarkably similar to a young Luffy, with the very same sort of starting setup and scenario with him in the bar and Shanks and being eager to meet pirates and all of that. So I just find that interesting, and it seems like Oda really is going hard on the idea of Luffy being an inspirational figure to the new generation throughout post-time skip, with the idea being that Luffy now is much more mature than he was pre-time skip, so he can start being a proper example for younger characters to kind of grow towards and follow. And finally, of course, we have the mystery silhouette at the end of the chapter. So, I personally feel like I'm gonna put my money on Scopper Gaban. The one thing is that the hair does not really quite match, because it seems to be the same character, very likely to be the same character that was drinking with Crocus at one point during the time skip, but maybe his hair has just changed color for some reason. It would not be the first time that that's happened in One Piece. Characters age very weirdly and they change their designs weirdly as time goes on. Scopper Gaban would be my guess. However, at the same time, Shiki is a solid possibility at this point, and I have long felt that it's unlikely that Shiki actually re-enters the primary story of One Piece, because he was invented for a movie. Even though he's canon to the story of One Piece, he was invented for a movie, so I don't know if Oda would want to use him outside of that movie. It's also interesting just because Shiki and Luffy, I don't know what type of dynamic they might have, or why Shiki would necessarily be wanting to meet Luffy right here, whereas I could imagine many reasons as to why Scopper Gaban might be interested in meeting Luffy here. Also, just considering the fact that this character, whoever it was drinking with Crocus, so there's a friendly relationship there, which suggests that he's likely a former member of the Roger Pirates or connected to the Roger Pirates, and the fact that Shanks was just at this island of Elbaf, so him meeting Scopper Gaban there might not be out of the question. Shanks did mention that he met some old friends when he arrived in Elbaf, so that may have been referencing Scopper Gaban. The final option is, of course, that it's just some totally different character, someone that we don't know whatsoever, and it might be the man with the burn mark or something like that. But overall, I don't think this chapter was about hype or drumming up a sense of mystery. I think it was just about the joy and the beauty of seeing the characters explore once again, and we as readers get to explore and enter another new magical wonderland in One Piece, one that it clearly seems that Oda was really looking forward to drawing and displaying for us. So I'm excited for Elbaf. This is one of the coolest islands that we have ever had. And finally, we have one interesting comment about the Rainbow Bridge in particular from the Voice of the People, my top tier of patrons. So Justin Holland just said, I think we may have just seen the secret game changer fast travel method in this chapter. So the painter that they used to create the bridge is extremely interesting, because the possibilities of what could be done with it are just potentially endless. If you can essentially paint whatever you're thinking of into reality, if that's what I'm kind of getting here from it, if that actually is the case, then this is just one of the most interesting plot devices in One Piece. I just wonder if it's something that's going to end up in the hands of one of the Straw Hats, like Nami getting the painter or something like that, the things that she could do with it, or even Usopp and what he could do with it combat-wise. And Usopp, interestingly, has always been depicted as being a very very good artist. So I'd say the potential of it unlocking fast travel for the Strahts is definitely there. We do know that at some point in the story, the Strahts are going to have to make, journeys very quickly around the globe. We know that some people feel that the final battle is going to take place at Marijua. At the very least, there's going to be a big race for the One Piece, so things moving faster, and, generally once there's a whole world war going on, characters do need to be shifted around a lot faster than usual. So at least for the Straw Hats, if this is a method of, fast travel being unlocked, I'm all for it. Let's see where this goes. This seems like a very important plot device for the arc. So with that, I'm excited for next week's chapter, and I'm happy that One Piece is back, and watch out for next Tuesday's video. That's all for this week.